Xerxes stood at the edge of the Hellespont and looked upon his army. Before him stretched the sea, bridged by ships. Behind him, the land was filled with men. Soldiers from many nations assembled at his command. Never had a single will gathered such numbers. The sight pleased him. He felt the weight of his power and the reach of his authority. For a moment, he was content. Then he remained looking, and as he continued to gaze upon the same army, another thought entered his mind. In a short time, in 100 years, not one of those men would still be alive. All that movement, all that strength, all that obedience would vanish as completely as a wave after it breaks. Nothing before his eyes had changed. The army was the same. The sea was the same. Yet his expression altered. His forehead tightened. Tears came. What had given him pleasure now brought sorrow. Artabanus, his uncle, noticed the sudden change and asked him why he wept. Xerxes answered that he had been struck by the brevity of human life. Artabanus replied that this should not astonish him. Life, he said, is not only short, but often burdensome. Many of those men would one day wish for death rather than endure the miseries that fortune would place before them. Thus, standing before the same sight, Xerxes passed from pride to grief, not because the world had shifted, but because his judgment had. And so the lesson is given without argument. Events do not command our passions. We do.
The same fate weighs lightly or heavily, depending on the soul that receives it.
Xerxes did not arrive at a moral doctrine. He did not discover a promise beyond life. He did not comfort himself with future rewards or punishments. He simply saw what was already there: an army, a moment, and the certainty that nothing would correct it later. That is why the scene matters. If meaning depended on another world, then this vision would be incomplete. If justice required compensation after death, then the weight Xerxes felt would be premature. But the Stoic lesson cuts differently. Life is not justified by extension. Suffering is not redeemed by delay. Virtue does not wait for an audit beyond the grave. What gives life its gravity is precisely that nothing rescues it later. And so the demand falls where it always falls, not on fate, not on gods, not on another world, but on judgment, here, now, while things still count. That is why Xerxes wept, and that is why the lesson remains.
You're not unhappy because you lack pleasure. You're unhappy because you're surrounded by it. Scrolling, notifications, small rewards, constant stimulation, zero direction. And yet, despite all this access, something feels urgently wrong. This is not a personal failure. It's a structural one. Part 1. The Dopamine Dilemma. We were told happiness would come from feeling good more often, so we optimized life for stimulation. But dopamine was never meant to sustain a life. It was meant to initiate action, not justify existence. Dopamine motivates. It excites, it pushes, but it does not anchor. When pleasure becomes the criterion, meaning dissolves. And when meaning dissolves, choice becomes impossible. You don't choose anymore. You just react. Part 2. Why be happy is a dead command. Modern culture doesn't just encourage happiness, it demands it. And that demand creates a quiet form of violence. If you're not happy, you're doing something wrong. But happiness is not a stable state. It was never designed to be. Trying to maintain it permanently turns life into constant correction, endless comparison, silent exhaustion. At some point, the system collapses. Not emotionally, practically. Transition. The real problem. The real problem is not that pleasure fades. The real problem is this. A life organized around pleasure cannot explain why you should endure anything at all. And sooner or later, endurance becomes necessary. This is where ancient philosophy enters, not as comfort, but as architecture. Part 3. Stoicism, the return of necessity. Stoicism does not promise happiness. That's why it works. It begins with a brutal clarification. Some things are up to you, most things are not. And peace does not come from controlling outcomes, but from organizing effort. The Stoic question is never, how do I feel? It is, what must be done, regardless of how I feel? This is not repression, it is structural sanity. Part 4. The Epicurean correction. Important. Epicurus is often misunderstood. Epicureanism is not indulgence. It is radical selectivity. Pleasure is not maximized, it is filtered. The goal is not excitement, but ataraxia, calm. Not abundance, but sufficiency. Epicurus teaches something modern culture refuses to hear. Most desires are optional, and many pleasures are liabilities. Part 5. The Turn. Here is the uncomfortable truth. You don't need more motivation. You need fewer options. You don't need to feel better. You need to decide what is non-negotiable. Peace does not come from pleasure. It comes from commitment to a structure you don't renegotiate every day. This is why ancient philosophies endure. Not because they soothe, but because they remove choice where choice destroys stability. Conclusion. The necessary decision. Sustainable joy is not found, it is installed. It emerges when life stops asking, what do I feel like today? And starts asking, what kind of life requires me, whether I like it or not? This is not self-help. This is self-governance. And that is the decision modern culture keeps postponing. Pleasure is easy. Happiness is unstable. But a life organized around necessity, that's the only one that lasts.